Cricket et al. It's a website. It's a podcast.
Pete, it's a way of life. It's Gideon Haig over here.
Peter Lawler over here.
And welcome to Cricket et al., your independent cricket podcast. It is also a Substack and is also a T-shirt, as you can see in the background, in a pathetic attempt at product placement.
And we're not together, Gideon. We've been like Siamese twins. We've been separated. Yeah. Are you allowed to say Siamese twins anymore? Or is it conjoined, isn't it? We might get cancelled. Yeah. Apologies to any conjoined twins who are listening.
Yeah. Pete, where are you?
Well, I'm finally back in the swamp. And, I was happy to get back, Gideon. It was a great test, but it was an exhausting test. And it's a fair flight home, isn't it, mate?
It is a fair flight home, particularly if, like me, you were so excited about leaving Perth that you spent 6 hours in the airport beforehand.
Oh, no.
I was pretty keen to get out of Perth, so I went to the airport a bit early, maybe thinking naively that they'd fly early if I arrived early enough, and no, they didn't. And then it got delayed, and there were storms back in Melbourne, so I didn't end up getting back till the early hours of this morning. Then I had to go on a wild hunt for cat litter at 24-hour supermarkets because the poor old cat had been leading a head hygienic life in my absence.
Well, the flight back to Sydney was absolutely jam-packed, and I'm cursing my luck at not getting an aisle seat. You know how restless I get when I'm
Yeah.
And but then I looked around and the guy directly behind me was Glenn McGrath. And I thought, oh, well, at least my lot's not as bad as his. I mean, he had his knees up round his chin.
So he was in economy.
Oh, mate, back of the bus.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, Qantas were very apologetic. I was trying to sleep and they kept coming up, oh, Mr. McGrath, can we give you a window seat? And he didn't want a window seat. And then, Mr. McGrath, can we give you some pajamas? I'm thinking, how's the fuck are you going to get his pajamas on in the middle of the thing? But he's a very gentle man, Glenn McGrath. Yeah. I do like him. And we had a bit of a chat about his foundation. They got some very big stuff coming up with this Sydney Test. They are a remarkable organisation, the McGrath Foundation. They really do some great work. But I know you know, but I've just got to tell everybody that I had a very, very exciting breakfast before I left Perth. My one chance to decompress, I went up to that Sessions cafe. I think you and I would have been there a few times.
Yeah.
Who walks in and sits at the next table? Virat Kohli.
Funny. Yeah.
And the kids.
Yep.
It was kind of thrilling. I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of Virat's, and he's got a great energy. So I met the family. It's quite nice. His youngest is a beautiful little boy, and naturally the kids have got some pretty good genes in them when it comes to looks. But he's a sweet man. He's nothing like that character that presented himself to Australia in his first couple of tours. He is that guy who asked the crowd in England not to abuse Steve Smith. He's a decent person. So that was one of the highlights of going to Perth, actually getting to meet Virat and able to say, go on.
So the 2 under 4, or basically because of course he left the last tour in order to go home for the first child, didn't he?
Yeah, and it was well worth the trip by the look of that child, Gideon. Yeah. Yep. 2 under 4, that's quite a juggling act on the road with the wife, as you can imagine. But it clearly makes him happy to have his children around.
Yeah.
And yesterday, Gideon, on getting back, I got in the car and drove to the SCG for they had a modest little ceremony down there for Philip Hughes before the start of play, but in the game between New South Wales and Tassie, is it?
That's right.
And I got to say, I was so glad I did. There would have been maybe, as far as punters are concerned, maybe 50 people at the ground, but a lot of sort of cricket staff people showed up and stood in the members. And it was a stinking hot day in Sydney. It got to 40 degrees, I think. So it was one of those really hot really still Australian cricket days, and the players and staff formed a guard of honour, or whatever you want to call it, and we had a minute's silence, and it was a minute's silence like I've rarely experienced. It was so appropriate for a boy from Maxville. It was so appropriate for cricket. It reminded me a little bit of Bradman's funeral at the Adelaide Oval. And the thing that really stood out to me was that when the minute silence, a minute silence has never sustained like this. I looked down, people started to murmur 3-4 minutes later.
Right.
You know, there wasn't, a minute silence, people then just turn around and get into the footy or the cricket or something like this. This one just hung in that sort of hot Australian air. It was very moving because, those players who were there that day, a lot of them were a part of that ceremony.
Well, including Sean Abbott, of course.
Yeah, poor Sean. I couldn't look at him, and he left the field. He actually went off to recompose himself. And what sort of character does that bloke have? To play in that game, he had the option not to. And then B, to get out there, he was on a hat trick pretty soon after he got into his work. He took 3 wickets, and this is a guy who was so distressed before play that, he had to leave the field. Something else, but gee, there were a lot of triggered people around cricket yesterday, Gideon. A lot of people on the phone. Yeah,
I think Sean was consulted, wasn't he, when the possibility of that fixture taking place was first considered an option, and he gave it the nod, and I think Moses Henriques was also consulted. Yeah, Ben Horne's written a nice piece today about Sean Abbott, reflecting what many of us think. How dignified he's been in bearing that particular burden and crafting a career subsequent to it. And I noticed that, interestingly, just looked up Crick Info before, Phil Hughes is the most searched player on Crick Info the last couple of days. So people are kind of going back and contemplating what might have been and what was, because even though it was abbreviated, it was a formidable first class record that was
there's been a lot of nice work done. I haven't got to see it yet, but Fox Cricket have done one with Drew Jones, who was there, was included in my piece. He was there on the day. He sent it to me this morning. I'll have a look at that. But it's good to be, while, we're all sort of sad around the anniversary of the death, it's great to be reminded of just how good Phil was as a cricketer, to go back to that stuff, to have, and as I say in my piece, to look at that square drive, that cut shot, to contemplate the very unique talent that he was. And we're not really finished with the anniversary yet, because there will be a ceremony before the Adelaide Test.
Yes, and the documentary, I think, goes to air that night, doesn't it? The first night.
It does, yeah. And look, it's appropriate, I guess, because, he was playing for South Australia in the last years of his life. And, of course, that's where we all reconvened for the first Test in 2014 after the funeral in Maxville.
Yeah.
And, again, you saw that incredible character of the cricketers to sort of wipe their eyes and get on with the game, and I reckon the big question mark, we all had that question mark around that time was, how do you play cricket again? You said the other day, didn't you? Bowlers apologising to you. They dropped short, We've just got to get up and do it. And a lot of those players were sort of, were disassembled before they went out to play, and disassembled after, but in the moment they played the game, and that was great. Yeah. Yourself, what have you been doing in between the last day of the Perth Test and here?
Apart from spending
waiting at
the airport, No, I went out to the Western Australian wheat belt, to some of those towns that have previously only been names to me, places like Northam and York, and it's a fantastic area of Australia. Place that just looks like nowhere else. Great fields of wheat, this incredibly sort of painterly backdrop, amazing vegetation. The actual sort of human imprint on the area is comparatively light. But I did some I went to the Motor Museum in York, and it was just absolutely fantastic. I had no
The
idea it was there. It was just in the main street of the Motor Museum. What a fantastic place for it.
Oh,
So,
wow. Yeah, you should come up for the Bright Rod Ride next year that Sue and I entered our Toyota. You saw a P76?
I did, and I saw a Ford Edsel,
Yeah.
and I saw a Gideon tricycle, which set the record for travel from Melbourne to Sydney in 1901. Did it in 38 hours. Now, I actually reckon that's amazing going, considering the roads that they would have had to go on to get a. I mean, it's a very, very flimsy vehicle, and I imagine that the roads at the time were incredibly rutted. No concession would have been made to suspension, but they did it in 38 hours. Of course, I'm doing or Janine is doing the drive from Melbourne to Sydney. We're looking forward to our road trip. I will be thinking of the Gideon when I do so.
I strongly urge you to go out to Cann River and turn left and take the route that Lenny Gwyther took, mate. It's a much more interesting drive up through the snowy mountains. The highway's a bit boring, although you will get to stop at where the dog shat on the tucker box. And, you could go to the Poets Renown, where I played that game of cricket with the Ponsford family once when we were both. We did a tandem drive, me and Ruby, down to Melbourne. Well, I had my family in our car and they had their family in that car. And we met at the Poets Renown and we played cricket.
Mm. Actually, speaking of which, Pete, I should mention that later on after the break, we have two guests joining us with a bit of a background cricket heritage, but also more distinguished than that. We've got David Bridie, one of our favourite musicians, along, a great cricket enthusiast, and his new best mate, Mick Harvey, who is no, not the member of the birthday party in the bad seeds. You just calm the hell down. Mick Harvey, excitingly, he is the grandnephew of Neil Harvey, and he has some fantastic family stories about growing up in probably Australia's most fecund cricket family. The only family, I think, where three brothers scored centuries on the same day of the Sheffield Shield in 1953. Just astounding record, almost unthinkable now.
You said fecund. I always said fecund, but then again, I'll defer to you. You probably know better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, what we've been doing since also is recuperating from the test match. And test matches are very satisfying, aren't they? Like I said in print the other day, because it does always feel after a test match like something has happened, that some definitive judgment has been reached, that kind of luck's been mitigated and conditions have been generally sort of neutralised and merit has prevailed. And merit, of course, prevailed by 295 runs in Perth. A couple of days afterwards, Pete, how are you thinking about that test match?
I'm thinking that Australia needs to put a hell of a lot of distance between itself and that test match, and should therefore, in terms of thinking from an Australian point of view, should similar events occur in Adelaide, they are in a world of trouble, and it's going to be a bloody miserable series for them. You've observed in the past that teams are very resilient and can shake things off quickly, much more quickly than they once did. I thought it was an extraordinary test match. I do think that Australia got left in the blocks a little bit. The toss was good for India, but Australia weren't good enough to hang on and make the most of the conditions. I think there's nothing but positives to take away in terms of the Indian performance, and just a series of question marks after the Australian performance. How did you see it?
Yeah, left in the blocks is quite a good way to express it, I think. I think you did see a reflection of the fact that, you know, Australia had gone 256 days without playing a test match, and this was the sixth in 70 days for India. That's not an excuse, but by any means. But it did look like a team that had just lost its test match rhythm. That it was, and they've got an eye to the fact that the series is 5 test matches long, and they want to have the nearest thing they have to their first choice 11 by the 5th test. But the risk of that, of course, is that you pace yourself and temper your performances to such a degree that that you get caught out, particularly against battle-hardened, talented, robust competition like India. You just can't afford to be anything other than absolutely cherry ripe when you get to the first test. And I thought India did a fantastic job of taking the initiative in that test match. I thought it was a brave decision by Bumrah to bat on winning the toss. And even when it didn't pay off quite as well, he seemed to manage to convince his teammates that the game was still there for the winning. And that opening spell, I don't think either of us will ever forget it. That first 6 overs from Bumrah after tea. He's now back as the number 1 test bowler in the world. And the fact that he wasn't before can only have been a terrible statistical oversight.
Yeah. A lot of things went wrong for Australia, didn't they? You got a lot of observation about what Mitch Marsh and where he was at with his fitness. Mitch Marsh signalled in the Sheffield Shield game that he played that he was going to bowl in that game, and he didn't. I think that they were a bit snookered by Mitch Marsh's physical condition. People are saying he's not fit, and he could be fitter, but his problem is that ankle, Gideon. It's a serious ankle problem. I think that operation he had a couple of years ago, that didn't cure him. That just sort of allowed him to limp through a bit more, and that's hobbled him in that game. As a result of that, I'm hearing that later today, like we're recording, I don't know what day it is, but it's a day when no one's playing cricket. I think Bo Webster will be brought into the Australian cricket team, into the squad, sorry. And I think Bo Webster is a very good chance of playing a test match before this series is out.
Oh, I think for sure. Yeah.
And that's interesting because, we've all sort of had our eyes on the other person in the team, Josh Inglis, and wondered how he fits in. But if it's Webster, well, that's going to make things interesting. I had a look at the those who didn't quite make it through the last round of the Great Australian Bat Off. Marcus Harris made a 62 in that second innings for Victoria. Constas 39 and 14, so we're moving on a little bit from there. Cameron Bancroft made a duck, and we saw his shoulders slump when he did, but at last, cricket has turned its kind face towards Cameron, and he's scored a century. Gee, he has been cursed this summer, Cameron Bancroft.
With a little bit of luck, but that's the 30th first-class 100. That's a really good record. I mean, that was the kind of thing that at the start of the season made me think that he was probably the favourite to take over.
Yeah.
So
it's a really good record, isn't it? Yeah.
I saw Jaden Goodwin, that big left-hander, got a first innings 100 in that game as well.
Yeah, he did.
He's a handy player. I think he was dropped early, but when he gets going, he's a very good-looking player. And Campbell Kellaway's made a 100 for Victoria too, and there are big raps on him. And Navetta Radhakrishnan made his maiden first-class 50. He's an ex-Aussie 19 player. There are lots of good reviews for him out there. It's interesting to go and look at the Shield averages at this stage.
Is it?
And we always go and say, who's making runs in the Shield?
Yeah.
We've ignored the fact that the highest scorer this summer is Hilton Cartwright. No one is mentioning his name in connection with the team. Jackson Bird and Sam Elliott have 16 wickets each. No one's talking about them being a potential candidate to play for Australia. Ben McDermott is up there. Now, he's about to turn 30. He's got a one-day 100. I actually always think he looks pretty good whenever I see him. But maybe he's been typed as a white ball player. I think that would be unfortunate. Peter Hanscom is still there or thereabouts, and he's probably a show to get picked for the Sri Lankan tour as a kind of a spin specialist. But yeah, I mean, the players that we all looked to at the start, your Renshaws and your Maddensons and your Bancrofts and your Caleb Jules. Well, Caleb Jules been dropped by Tasmania, I noticed, in the latest round. Henry Hunt's made a couple of hundreds, but he's also had a few failures. No one's made an overwhelming case for selection. Bo Webster's averaging 50 with the bat, and he's taken 9 wickets. So perhaps he is your Sheffield Shield form pick.
Yeah, I tell you, Yeah, and you're right. I think we were only looking at through the prism of openers, weren't we? And now we're looking through the prism of available all-rounders, given that Cameron Green is broken, Mitch Marsh is broken.
Yeah.
Aaron Hardy has found a very poor timing not to be fit for this game. Webster did well in that Shield game, got a 61-49 and took five wickets across the innings. The thing that's got the old New South Wales Blues people spitting chips is that Zampa has played this game.
Yeah.
People are infuriated that Zampa has pushed his way into that team in New South Wales. The old hands anyway. Oh, because, they resent Zampa because he is essentially...
Doesn't know the words to the national anthem, or is that... no, that was our obsession.
We've moved on from that one, Gideon. No, they think that he's got to taking the piss a bit with first-class cricket because he's essentially signed to New South Wales, but he lives up at Byron Bay, and I think they think that he doesn't attend to state cricket duties enough to warrant a place in the side when clearly the Australian selectors want him in there, and he wants to be in there to put up his hand to qualify potentially for the Sri Lankan series that you mentioned earlier.
So they resent him when he doesn't play, and they resent him when he plays. That's perverse.
That's the beauty of resentment, Gideon. You can. it's a 360 emotion, mate. Yeah.
No one does resentment like New South Wales, do they?
Oh, I don't know. You Victorians are good haters too. Well,
yeah. Only one more round of the Shield, of course. That starts next Friday. And then big hiatus, actually no more first-class cricket until they pick the team for Sri Lanka. So a lot rides on this last round, the last chance to flesh out your red ball credentials.
India get a tryout, of course, in a 2-day tour game against the Prime Minister's 11, which is a day-night game. I really like the idea of them warming up that way. I'm intrigued by it, and if I had more energy, I'd jump in the car and drive to Canberra to watch it. Would take me back to that time we had the standoff before they drove to Canberra in the Monkey Gate series. You remember that?
I do. And actually, the PM's 11 looks like a meaningful game now, doesn't it? Because they are using it as a pink ball rehearsal.
Yeah, and, absolutely.
And of course, Australia's pink ball record in Adelaide. That is a hopeful omen for Australia. I think we're unbeaten, aren't we, in pink ball test matches in Adelaide? So
we're also they were also unbeaten in games at that new stadium in Perth until last week, mate. So history's fun. I tell you what, I reckon every Australian batter is trying not to think about the chance that Jasprit Bumrah will have that new pink ball in his hand at dusk in Adelaide. Yeah. I mean, dear God, you reckon there was some carnage when he was on song in that first session of the first innings. Stand by. If he gets that pink ball singing in the once the sun has set, it's going to be very, very, very hard work for Australian batters.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, that final session on that first day was perfectly set up for him. You know, he knew how many overs he was going to bowl, and he took care of himself in the second innings too, didn't he? He knows he's got 5 Test matches this summer, so he left most of the heavy lifting on the last day to his junior contemporaries. There was a lot to like about that Indian effort. A lot of forethought went into it, a lot of cohesion. And a lot of quality. We now have, I think Jaiswal's become the number 2 ranked batter on the ICC rankings, and he deserves it, frankly, on that form.
Bloody oath. In fact, I must try and find a replay of that innings because I want to watch it again and just want to savour it, from with a little bit of distance. And they're just trolling world cricket and Australian cricket now. India with this bloody IPL auction, and they picked the 13-year-old kid. Have you seen the highlights of that kid batting again?
I have seen it. Yeah.
That straight force through the offside that he's got, straight bat drive. Wow. I don't know if they post-dubbed it, but the sound of his bat hitting the ball was beautiful.
Yeah, I think, look, one of the reasons why India was able to hit the ground running here, and Australia was maybe just thinking in the medium to longer term, is because they've got so many good players. We saw this the last time they were here. That even their second string players, when they came into the side, were admirably equipped to take on red ball cricket in Australia. It's a squad with enormous depth. Advantage India, very much so, going into the second test. There's some other interesting cricket around. I don't know whether you've been looking at this Caribbean Global Super League that's about to start in Guyana.
I have not, Gideon. Do tell me about it, please, because I've got to be really careful after what I said about Cayman Islands cricket. You go.
This is absolutely bizarre. It's a 5-team T20 competition. Starts tomorrow night in Guyana. Right. The competing teams are the Hampshire Hawks, the Rangpur Riders from the Bangladesh Premier League, the Lahore Quailanders from the PSL, and the Guyana Amazon Warriors, and Victoria.
Yep.
Victoria, well, I don't know. How would you describe them? They are a team from Victoria, but they are only vestigially Victorian. They're captained by Corey Anderson, the former New Zealander turned American, with Kareem Agor also from the New South Wales squad. There's John O'Wells is playing for them. And Scott Edwards, of course, the captain of the Netherlands, who is originally Australian. Blake McDonald from the Renegades. But then Tom Moody's nephew David is playing.
Nice fella.
Joe Clark is playing. Nice fella, yeah. They play the Guyana Amazon Warriors in the first game, or second game actually, who are captained by Imran Tahir. And include Moeen Ali, Shai Hope, Shimron Hetmai. That's actually a pretty hot team. I think they won at the CPL last year. That is, it's 11 games. It's played across 11 days. The final is on 7 December. And guess what? It's all about money, because Guyana is extremely rich at the moment. Guyana is neck deep in offshore oil, and with money comes the opportunity to stage cricket. And the Global Super League, I mean, it's a pretty ambitious name. One would suspect it has ideas above its station. Is a kind of a reprise of, well, what the Champions League used to be like. You remember the Champions League, the thing that was launched alongside the IPL with the cooperation of Australia and South Africa, which was an attempt to bring domestic T20 sides from all over the world.
I liked it, actually. I liked that idea. I remember Simon Kaddish taking New South Wales over in the early days. Yeah,
I didn't think it was a terrible idea. I thought it was well before its time. But the irony of the Global Super League is that none of these teams are actual champions of their competitions. They're just there.
So it's added another layer of meaning to franchise cricket, isn't it? If you can be a Victorian, so has somebody bought the Victorian franchise and taken it over there? Yeah.
It's like a franchise of a franchise.
It's
a franchise cubed. I dare say, Pete, that if you turn on your television, I know you're wont to do this at 4 o'clock in the morning, you'll probably find it if there's no cricket coming in from the Caymans.
Outstanding. Gideon, I tell you what, just to turn the focus back on us for a minute, because we've become so self-obsessed. It was a really satisfying experience to go over there and just be supported by the Cricket NL people. You know, to have that curated community that we now have, and including the people that listen to this podcast, with us on the road. And it was great fun. It was really good feedback to the fact that we filed on deadline. We held those old newspaper traditions. Yeah. Well, not deadline. We filed on stumps, didn't we?
We did,
because at newspaper days, we would have actually filed at T from Perth.
That's right.
But we filed at stumps, and people seem to like the reports coming straight in. As I was a bit of a guy who liked, get up the next morning and reflect on the cricket in the newspaper. Very old school I was, but I mean, the only reason we do it is because we're just itching to get out of the ground and get home to the piano, to hit the piano bars of Perth, Gideon.
And to get potting between times.
Oh, that's
but
the
you're
other
right.
thing
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Mm.
Perth was always a huge challenge, wasn't it, for filing? You always had to get your piece away by tea. I can remember the night that Warner made that 100 in the final session of that Test match against India, and I think all our stuff the next day was about Australia's outstanding bowling performance, which had terminated at tea.
Caught with our pants down again. Yes, that's right. But yeah, no, it was great, and it felt really good to be over there and doing it for Cricket et al. And getting everybody's feedback from the website and whatever.
Yeah, look, it was exciting. I met a lot of people over there who were subscribers. Because I had 6 hours in the airport yesterday, I actually met quite a few Cricket et al. Subscribers there too.
And they'd all be flying first class cricket. They'd be a fine breed of people. No, there's no fine people in first class. Yeah.
No, they're people like me who are on non-flexible, very, very cheap tickets who are lumbered with an extra couple of days in Perth for their trouble. But anyway, we had a great time, and looking forward to coming to your neighbourhood, Adelaide. Look out, lock up your daughters. Cricket et al. is coming with T-shirts.
Do they all have the same teeth as us, Gideon? Do they all have a lack of dental intervention in their lives?
I'm hiding behind my microphone.
I'm going to talk like that now because people have been pointing out that maybe if we get more sponsors, we could actually get our teeth.